So now I would like to introduce Karen-Inge Karstoft from Copenhagen. Hello, very nice to see you this morning. It's wonderful to welcome you to our symposium, and we look forward very much to what you have to say to us. And you are Associate Professor in the Department of Psychology at the University of Copenhagen, and you're going to speak about mental health amongst women Ukrainian refugees in Denmark. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is absolutely true. And can you just confirm that you can hear me?
We can hear you, yeah.
You can hear me. And can you see my slides too?
And we can see your slide.
Everything is good then.
Everything is good.
So thank you for welcoming me, and thank you for having me. As you said, my name is Karen-Inge Karstoft, and I'm an associate professor at the University of Copenhagen. I'm going to talk today in a presentation I called War and Women. So it's about the mental health and daily living conditions of Ukrainian refugees in Denmark. So I'm going to present to you some results from a large study that we call the Danish Refugee Cohort, or DARECO for short. And I'm going to do today a specific focus on female Ukrainians. So just a few words about the DARECO study. It's a prospective cohort study of all Ukrainians who arrived in Denmark after the full-scale Russian invasion on February 24th of 2022, and then a year ahead. And just for those who are curious, we just decided to expand the cohort to include everyone who also arrived after that date, but we are only collecting those data now, so I cannot show them yet. DARECO is a questionnaire-based study where we sent out questionnaires in an electronic mailbox that we have here in Denmark called A-Box, and we sent it out to every adult Ukrainian who arrived in that period I just mentioned. So that is 18,389 that we sent out questionnaires to. And this is just an overview of when we have collected data of the population. So we started basically the study in 2022 and did a pilot data collection of just a small sample of 100 individuals back in the fall of 2022. And then we collected the first real data among the entire population in February until April of 2023. And then we did the first follow-up in the fall of 2023, and then we're actually doing the third follow-up right now. And we're waiting for these data to come in so that we can present more results at a later point in time. So just a little bit about what it is that we want to study here. The overall theme is on mental health, but we realize obviously that there are many, many things that are important to mental health. So we have more or less 4 larger domains that we asked to in our baseline questionnaire. So we ask about pre-migration living conditions and demographics, and we ask about war exposures and potentially traumatic events. So those are all the things that happened before migration. Then we know that a lot of the things that are going on here in Denmark after arrival are of course super important too to the mental health and well-being. So we ask about daily living difficulties here in Denmark. I'm going to get back to what that is. We ask about trust in the Danish society and in other Danes. And we ask about social network here in Denmark. Then we have a large set of questions about mental health. At the first data collection, we asked about symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. We ask about health and disability. We ask about mental well-being, and we ask about alcohol use. And then our final domain is about plans and wishes for the future. Here we ask about the hopes and dreams, if they are about staying in Denmark or returning to Ukraine in the shorter or longer term. Then in the follow-up, we don't ask again about pre-migration conditions, so we focus on the here and now and ask about, again, the post-migration situation, the mental health, now including symptoms of depression, as we realize that they might very well develop over time. And then we ask again about plans and wishes for the future. So the things we want to do is also very much look at how do these things develop over time as a population. Does it seem to get better, get worse? And can we identify those that have a great need for assistance and potentially for psychological treatment? So this is just a little bit of the participants, so you know who it is that I'm talking about. As I said already, we have a bit more than 18,000 in our population. So those are all the adults that arrived within the first year after the full-scale invasion. We sent out questionnaires to everyone, and a bit more than 11,000 did not respond to the questionnaire, meaning that we have a sample size at the first assessment of almost 7,000. Then between the first assessment in the spring of 2023 and the second assessment in the fall of 2023, almost 500 individuals left Denmark, or at least those were the ones we could identify to have left Denmark. There might be more. So that means we re-invited 6,500, and now this time a bit more than 2,000 did not respond, meaning that at the second time point in the fall of 2023, we had a bit more than 4,000 individuals who responded to our questionnaire. So those are the ones that I'm talking about when I'm starting to present the data to you in a bit. Now, I should say up front that there are going to be a lot of numbers here, and you can interrupt me if I speak too fast. And otherwise, I'm going to sum it up in the end, and you're more than welcome to have my slides too for further scrutiny. So first, as I also showed in the overview, we focus quite a bit on factors of importance before migration. And the thing we focus on specifically, besides some demographic factors, is experiences of war. And we do that because we know from the research literature that individuals who leave the country because of war are, of course, I was about to say, at high risk of having been exposed to acts of war. And we also know that exposure to acts of war increases the risk of developing mental health problems. So that's why it's important to us. So we ask a question: has your hometown in Ukraine been affected by actions of war and/or under Russian invasion at any time since February 24th of 2022? And now just a general point about the plots that I show you. I hope you can see the pointer. For all of these plots, I divided into women and men so that we can see the differences here. So the red bars in all of my plots represent women and the gray bars represent men. And if you see down here on the response options, you see that it's very few who just say blank no to having a hometown that was exposed to actions of war. About 20% of the women say that there was not any actions of war in the hometown, but there were actions of war close to the hometown. Then you see the next set of bars here, where we are above 50%. They say that yes, there were actions of war in my hometown, but my home was not damaged. And then the last 20% of the females say that, yes, there were actions of war in my hometown, and yes, my home was damaged. So out of all of these who say that, yes, there were actions of war in my hometown, we then ask them, were you present when this happened? And that is because we know being physically close to the horrific events of war further increases the risk of developing mental health problems. And what we see here, again divided into males and females, we see that only a bit more than 20% of both genders say that no, they were not present when it happened. And we see that more than 70% of the females say that yes, they were present when there were actions of war in their hometown. We also see a difference between males and females in that a little more of the females than the males were present when there were actions of war in their hometown. Yes. Another thing we know is that tragically a lot of people who are from a country of war loses relatives or close friends as a result of the war. And here we ask them if they have lost any family members or close friends as a result of the war. And we don't see any big gender differences here, but we do see that around 40% of both males and females report that they have lost a close friend or a relative as a result of the war. A final thing that we find important to consider is that obviously acts of war were going on in Ukraine even before 2022, and especially from the part of our sample that is from the easternmost part of Ukraine, which is actually quite a great deal of our sample. So we asked them if they lived in a place that was affected by war before the Russian invasion in February of 2022. And here again, we don't see massive differences across the two genders, and we see that it's roughly 50-50. So a bit more than 50% of the females say that no, they did not live in a place affected by war before 2022, and a bit less than 50% of the females say that yes, they did live in a place affected by war before 2022. So summing up a bit about these exposures to war, we see that it's fairly similar across males and females, with a bit more of the women who were directly exposed to actions of war in their hometown when they were present themselves. Moving on to the next topic of our study was all the factors of impact here in Denmark. And some things that I thought were pretty interesting and important to present to you today, with the focus being on the women of war, is the family situation in Denmark, because we expect that could be pretty different for males and females. So the first thing we ask them is if they, in Denmark, if they have a partner, and we ask them if they have a partner, if that partner is with them here in Denmark or still back in Ukraine. And what we find is this. So if you look at the first response option on the left, the answer is no partner. And here you see that actually 55% of our female participants say that they have no partner. This is very much higher than the males we see in our sample, where the corresponding number is 35%. Moving on, we see that of those who have a partner, so those are the two set of bars on the right, we see that only 20% of the entire sample of females report to be in Denmark with their partner. On the other hand, we see that also 20%, a bit more than 20%, reports to be separated from their partner, to have their partner back home in Ukraine. The pattern is very much different in males. Here we see that 60% of the males report to have a partner and to be with their partner here in Denmark, whereas very few of the males have their partner back in Ukraine. I think there are multiple reasons for this, and I could come up with quite a few, but for now, I'm just going to leave the numbers here for you to interpret, and we can maybe discuss it later. Yes, but I think what is important here is to say that we have a great proportion of our sample who are females and who are separated from their partner. Another thing we ask about is if they have their minor children with them here in Denmark. And here we say that we see differences again between the genders. So we see that 55% of the sample report to have no minor children with them here in Denmark, whereas it's the case for about 65% of the males. So they are here without children. We see that it's reversed for having children here in Denmark. We see that more of the females are here in Denmark with their minor children. It's about 43%, whereas we see that for males, it's about 38%. So quite a difference between the two genders again. So we have a picture now of more females being here alone without a partner, but more females having their minor children with them. Another thing that we know to be of great importance for mental health is the question of having someone to talk to have a social network and someone that can support you in times of need. We are aware, of course, that resettling to a different country, it might be very difficult to establish a new network, and it might take quite some time. And that increases, of course, the risk of feeling lonely. So the next question we're asking our population is if they are ever alone, even though they wish to be with someone else. So a question of being lonely in Denmark. And when we ask that, we again see quite some spectacular differences, I think, between the males and females, which might have something to do with, of course, females being more often separated from their partner, right? But what we see here is, to this question of being alone, even though one wished to be with someone else, we see that the males say no to that 50% of the time, whereas only 35% of the women say that no, it doesn't ever happen that I'm alone, even though I wish to be with someone else. About 22% of both genders say that yes, it happens, but it happens rarely. And then for the two categories that I think are very important to pay attention to here, namely ones where a person say, yeah, it happens once in a while that I'm alone, even though I want to be with someone else, or it happens very often, we see that this is the case more often for females. So indeed, women are unwantedly alone more often than men. And the numbers add up to the fact that 43% of the women report that they are alone, even though they wish to be with someone else, either once in a while, that's 27%, or very often, or that's 16%. And when we compare that number of 43% of females to the males, it's about 30%. So more women feel lonely than men. We asked that question, a similar question, but a little bit of a different way, because feeling lonely might not be the only thing of importance. It might be enough for you, or it might be really good for you at least, to have someone to talk to when you're in need of support or when you're in trouble. And that might also be calling someone, for example, so it doesn't have to be someone who's physically there, but that you have that source of support to call or talk to when you're in need of support. So we ask a question of, do you have someone to talk to when you are in trouble or need of support? And that we ask at the second time point, so in the fall of 2023. And here you see that less than 10% say that, no, it never happens that I have someone to talk to when I'm in need of support. We do see that females say that, yes, it sometimes happens that I always have someone to talk to when in need of support. That is more often the case for females. And we see that females are also overrepresented in the category that says that, yes, most of the time I have someone to talk to when I'm in need of support. And most strikingly, we see that more males than females, actually quite a few more, say that, yes, they always have someone to talk to when in need of support. So the take home here in general is that we see that fewer females report that they always have someone to talk to when they're in need of support. So summing up of this category I just presented to you, we see that females are more lonely. They, in fewer instances, always have someone to talk to when they're in need of support. And they are more often separated from their partner. I'm going to move on to something similar, but still a little bit different now, namely about post-migration living difficulties. So post-migration living difficulties is an area that has been studied in many different refugee populations and like immigrant populations too. And it has been found that having these living difficulties is associated with worse mental health outcomes. And it's something we study in the recognition that arriving in a new country, you might have some significant barriers of thriving in your daily life. And this is what we want to get an impression of. So basically, we talk about 4 different domains of post-migration living difficulties. And these are access to healthcare, concerns about your family, the refugee determination process, and general concerns. And I'm going to talk today specifically about these 2 domains here at the top, namely problems with access to healthcare and problems of family concerns. And access to healthcare covers questions such as worries about not getting treatment for health problems, poor access to medical care, poor access to dental care, and poor access to psychological counseling. And family concerns relates to the questions of separation from family, worries about family back home, being unable to return home in an emergency, and having concerns about your children's well-being in Denmark. So I'm going to start out with the first domain, namely perceived access to healthcare, and see what that looks like in our population. And this is basically the plot that I'm going to talk you through now. And I want to say first that if you look over here at the legends, the darker the color, the more serious the problem. So the darkest color says that this particular area is a serious problem. The lighter color, it's a fairly big problem. Yet lighter, it's somewhat of a problem. Lighter again, it's a little problem. And the lightest color says that this is not a problem for the individual. If you then look over here about the first question where they ask them about poor access to dental care, you could see that overall the darker colors takes up more of the spectrum for women than it does for men. So this tells us that women of our cohort perceives poor access to dental care of more of a problem than males does. And it turns out that when we look down over all of our questions here in the domain of access to healthcare, we see that this is the case for all of the questions. So worries about not getting treatment for health problem, this represents a bigger issue for women than it does for men. Poor access to medical care is a bigger problem for women than it is for men. Poor access to psychological counseling, it's a bigger problem for women than it is for men. I'm going to say a bit more about the last one when we get to the mental health questions, But the overall message for you to take home here is that for women, having access to the treatment they need is a bigger problem than it is for males. So that this tells us that the population of women has more unmet needs in terms of healthcare. Moving on to the other area of post-migration living difficulties that I wanted to talk to you about concerns home and family. And these are questions, for example, about worries about the family back home. And you can see here straight away that the same pattern is visible as it was in the first area we talked about. So for women, worries about the family back home in Ukraine is a bigger problem than it is for men. Now, thinking back at what I showed you about 3 or 4 slides ago, this makes sense because more women than men are separated from their partner, right? We also see that separation from family exactly is a bigger problem for women than it is for men. We see, however, that being unable to return home in an emergency is just as much a problem for men than it is for women. So this is a concern for everyone. Fears of being sent home to the country of origin. This is a bigger problem for men than it is for women. And I think there are many reasons we can think about why this is the case. But this is one of the few where it's actually a bigger problem for males than it is for females. We see that finding a balance between job and family life, that is also a bigger concern for women than it is for men. And finally, we see that concern about children's well-being in Denmark, it's a bigger concern for women than it is for men. So I think it's fair to say that over this broad range of questions pertaining to family life, to family back home, and to access to healthcare, women perceive more problems in their daily life in Denmark than males do. Then finally, the last domain of our survey that I want to talk to you about is the mental health. And here we're looking at different domains of mental health. And the first one we're looking into is post-traumatic stress disorder and PTSD. I do a lot of presentations for audiences who do research on PTSD, so I tend to assume that everyone knows exactly what that is. But I'm going to spend a few minutes today just talking about the nature of PTSD. So what is it actually? Post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, is a disorder that develops in a minority, but a substantial minority of individuals who have experienced or witnessed a scary, shocking, terrifying, or dangerous event. And I think this sentence exemplifies why we think it's important to look at in this population, because as we saw in one of my first slides, the majority of our sample has been exposed to actions of war that are truly scary, shocking, terrifying, and dangerous, right? PTSD symptoms centers around re-experiencing the event, so that might be having nightmares, having intruding thoughts about it, having actual flashbacks. It centers around avoiding people, places, and things that serves as a reminder of the traumatic event. And it centers around a feeling of current threat, so the risk of the terrifying event happening again, causing the individual to be constantly on guard and hypervigilant. So it's some pretty serious symptoms that causes a severe dysfunctioning in the individual who suffers from severe symptoms. Now, in this survey, we ask not only about PTSD, but also an add-on disorder called complex PTSD, or for short, CPTSD. So I need to say a little bit about what complex PTSD is as well. And it's a diagnosis that has been introduced in the newest version of the International Classification of Disorders, the one that is called ICD-11. It is still being implemented, so it's all very new. And I think basically you could say that CPTSD is PTSD and then some. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is the visualization of what PTSD symptoms look like. As I said before, PTSD centers around the symptoms of re-experiencing, of avoidance, and of current threat. CPTSD concerns all these symptoms as well. So an individual who is diagnosed with CPTSD will have the symptoms of re-experiencing, of avoidance, of current threat, and then also a group of symptoms that we refer to as disturbances of self-organization, or DSO. And the DSO symptoms concerns affect dysregulation, so either having problems feeling joy or having problems calming down once you're upset. It concerns symptoms of negative self-worth, so feeling worthless or as a failure. And it concerns disturbed relationships, so having difficulties establishing and maintaining meaningful relationships with significant others. So CPTSD is expected to be more severe. It is expected to be more difficult to treat, and it is expected to be more chronic. CPTSD is also expected to arise more frequently after long-term exposure to interpersonal trauma. So, for example, being in a longer time exposed to actions of war, for example. And this is why we find it very relevant to study in this population. All right. I know I'm speaking a bit fast here, and I just have a few more slides to get through, and I hope you're hanging in. So for measures of mental health, one of the things we wanted to do was to say how big of a problem is PTSD and CPTSD in this population in the first and in the second time point. And these are the raw numbers that I wanted to show you first. So if we look at the first time point that we call T1, so this is 1 year after the full-scale invasion, we see that the combined prevalence, so the percentage of individuals who fulfill the criteria for the two diagnoses by self-report, is almost 30%. So almost 1/3 of the sample. And you can see here how it distributes on PTSD with almost 16% and CPTSD with 13.5%. When we then ask the exact same questions about the symptoms half a year later, in the fall of 2022, we see, and this is of course nice, that it has been reduced to 24.5%. This is still a lot, 1/4 of the sample, but we do see a reduction over time. We see now that especially the proportion who qualify for PTSD has reduced, whereas, and in line with expectations, CPTSD seems to be harder to break. The question, of course, that I wanted to answer today and look a bit more into our numbers is, are these numbers different for males and for females? The question we could ask is there a higher risk for one of the genders for either of these diagnoses? And this is the plot that should show us exactly that. So the first one I'm going to show you is from T1, so the first time point of assessment, so in the spring of 2023. And what you see in the leftmost bars here is that the majority of the sample has neither of the diagnoses. What you see, however, also quickly is that more males than females have no symptoms of either of the disorders. Then looking conversely at the two groups of PTSD and complex PTSD, it is very, very clear to see that more females than males fulfills the criteria for both PTSD and complex PTSD. Especially we see that almost 3 times as many females than males fulfill the criteria for complex PTSD. And if you remember what I said just a second ago, CPTSD is expected to be the more severe and the more chronic disorder. So I think this is something we should really pay attention to. When I do the same thing with the data for the second time of assessment, where you remember that the overall prevalence of PTSD has been reduced, you see that the pattern is exactly the same. The numbers of the ones without diagnosis is now higher because fewer has the disorders, but you see again that the pattern is exactly the same. More females than males qualify for the diagnosis. It is between 2 and 3 times the number of females fulfill the criteria for the disorder of CPTSD when we compare it to males. To not focus solely on PTSD, we also ask about the symptoms of depression. And I just want to show you this to see what the general picture of the mental health is. We do this at the second time point, so in the fall of 2023. And briefly, and before I go into details with the plot, we see the exact same picture as we do for PTSD. So on the leftmost side here, we see the ones who report no or very few symptoms of depression. And we see that this goes for 60% of the males and only for 42% of the females, right? And then when we look at the disorder at increasing degrees of severity, we can see that at all of these groups who have a level of depression symptoms, there are a higher number of females. And the disproportion between males and females becomes larger as the severity increases. So you can see here that at least twice as many females than males have moderate, moderately severe, or severe levels of depression symptoms compared to males. One final slide before summing up. When we did the first questionnaire here, we were in close contact with some of the NGOs, so that would be the Danish Red Cross and the Danish Refugee Council. And they asked us if we could include a measure of alcohol use, because in their impression, this was becoming a pertinent problem in the population. So we used a screener for alcohol use where we ask individuals how often they drink alcohol, how much they drink when they drink, and if they find it difficult to stop drinking once they started. And then we get a score on this measure, and it looks like this. And first of all, I want to say to you that if we compare these data to data from the Danish background population, the Danish level of alcohol use would be much higher. In Denmark, we have a pretty strong alcohol culture. So this is just to put it into context and say that what we see reported here is actually not very high. What we do see, however, and this is just one thing I want to show you to say that mental health might express differentially across males and females, because here we see that Ukrainian males drink more than Ukrainian females. All right. I think I have used up all my time here, so now I just want to sum up the tour de force of numbers I've just been going through. And I think the overall picture of Ukrainian women in Denmark and the mental health we can paint is that compared to men, Ukrainian women are more often here without a partner. They are more often here with minor children. They have more often been present during actions of war in their hometown, but the difference is small. They are more alone even though they want to be with someone else. They report more post-migration living difficulties with access to healthcare and worries about their family. They drink less alcohol, but they report more symptoms of depression, and they report more symptoms of PTSD and CPTSD. And indeed, their risk of CPTSD is almost 3 times that of males. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen-Inge, for that very excellent presentation to us and for the level of research input that you have given us there. It's a very, very detailed study. It's a very thorough study, and you've explained it to us superbly. So it gives us a real insight into what people are experiencing who are refugees from Ukraine in your country at the moment. We really appreciate your academic scholarship and the sophistication of your research, and also your explanation to us of the complex post-traumatic stress disorder, which is a really important thing as part of your findings. So thank you very much. I'm sure there will be some questions, so we will have the round table this afternoon, and people will have some questions for you at the round table this afternoon.
And I have to say that I cannot participate in the round table
you can't
because
participate.
It is my daughter's birthday. I am so sorry.
Oh well, happy birthday to your daughter.
But you're very welcome to email me some questions that come up, and I will answer.
So thank you for that invitation to our participants that you can email with any questions that you have. Okay, I hope you have a good afternoon. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.